Hey, Scott, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun. I appreciate you.
I really enjoyed being on your show. You're so personable, attentive, warm, curious. It was really nice to be on. So I'm glad that we could have you here.
Thank you. And I've listened to your show for a while now and I love it. And I mean, I haven't been on your show until right now, but the feeling and the sentiment is mutual. I loved your episode with Seth Godin, who's also he's amazing. And I love actually how you take people that normally they sound the same on every other podcast, but you pull things out of them that I think they're not
Scott,
usually used to speaking about. And I think that's
Scott,
an
that
amazing
is
talent.
Scott, that was so nice of you what you just said. That's really generous. I appreciate you. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about what you've been up to. You have a podcast. I was
I
on
do.
just talking about it. It's called Success Story. It's a number one entrepreneur show, top 10 in the business realm, and you've done so much with it. So, first of all, why did you want to do this podcast? What was sort of the drive behind it?
The drive when I first started out was really this realization that I think success, however you want to define it, or fulfillment, or achieving whatever objectives you want to achieve in your life, it doesn't have to be as complicated as we make it out to be. And I think that especially with this whole hustle culture society that we live in, where we have to, pay our dues and we have to, work at the expense of sleep and relationships and expense of everything. I think that's toxic in many ways, but at a very basic level, it's toxic because it doesn't actually serve the goal that most young people have, which is to make a little bit of money, figure out their career, build a business, regardless of the fact that it ignores all the other most important parts of your life, which is spirituality, fulfillment, relationships, health, wellness, all of that. So the point was to unpack the stories of people that we all look at as quote unquote successful and show the wins and the losses and the lens and the mental models that they use to navigate their world and their success, and hopefully teach that to somebody who's just starting out. And it's something that I could have used when I was starting out, and it's something I still use every single day. As I'm sure, we're both podcast hosts, we both get to speak to incredible people, but and selfishly, we probably learn a lot. But that was really it. It was because, life doesn't have to be as complicated. So let's learn from people that have done it before.
Well, first of all, you said just starting out as if you could have used it then, but you look so young that I'm like, are you really not just starting out? But I know you've done many, many, many things. I agree with what you said about fulfillment. You and I had a talk on your podcast about what success and abundance really looks like to me. And you recently did a post where you talked about not like stop chasing your dream life, but build your perfect day. I just want
Hmm.
to pause on that for a second. What does that mean, and why do you feel like that's really the mandate?
I think that's the mandate because we, again, a very ambitious crowd, they always focus on the end result, on achieving the exit or achieving the even the salary that they want, and they forget that these huge life milestones are a point in time. And ironically, they also forget that once we achieve those milestones, we have a really good way as humans of forgetting that we've come so far, and then we set new milestones and goals for ourselves without even realizing that if we looked back at, what our 20-year-old version of ourself would say about what we've accomplished, they'd be very proud. We forget all that very easily. So instead of just focusing on the end result and the goal in the future and all the items on your personal vision board, the vacations, the mansion, the car, the yacht, the plane, depending on how big you want to think, our life is made up of individual days. And I think that we sacrifice our individual days in pursuit of the end result. And I want to push back against that. I think that everything that we need to live a fulfilled life, which is meaningful work, people that care about us, conversations that matter, access to, health and wellness and knowledge and wisdom, all the things that fulfills us as human beings, we can tap into every single day. And a lot of people forgo a lot of that in pursuit of the thing. And when they achieve the thing, they realize that they've trained themselves to hate every single day of their life because they've only been pursuing that end goal. So I think that it
Yeah,
serves you well to love every single day, to do things that light a fire every single day, to still pursue that thing. But your life is made up of days, not made up of milestones.
it's interesting because you were a person who was in like a traditional business setting and then you
Hmm.
transitioned over to entrepreneurship. And
Mhm.
I feel like one of the reasons, and I mean, I'm just throwing this out here, but I think it's probably true. One of the reasons that a lot of people don't love their days is because they have day jobs, and their day jobs don't necessarily put them in their zone of genius. Their day jobs
Yeah.
don't necessarily make them feel creative and alive and understood or appreciated. And they kind of clock in and clock out. And I'm curious what you think about that, because I think that Gino Wickman said that only certain people are really meant to be entrepreneurs, and not everybody has the stomach for it. Not everybody has the sort of proclivity for it. But what do you think about your transition from a regular job to a entrepreneurship kind of career? And do you think that that is something that uh, you think other people can aspire to across the board? And do you think that that can play a role in our fulfillment and our happiness day to day?
You know, it's interesting. So you say that people, I'm going to push back on that idea and help me understand, let me know if this makes sense. So I would actually argue that people with day jobs actually enjoy their day more because there's a point when they shut off.
That's interesting.
I think that that means that they at 5 o'clock will go home and they'll spend time with their family and they'll go play sports and they'll have hobbies and pastimes. I think that when you're building something yourself, I think that it's very hard to shut off. And I think that anything that isn't working towards that goal, you almost see as an inconvenience. So in both cases, people can hate their days. They can hate their days because they're working 9 to 5 towards someone else's goal and they don't enjoy it. But you can also hate your day because you do nothing except work towards your goal. And you don't have anything joyful in your life at all. At least with a 9 to 5, there's time for joy and extracurricular and leisure. So
It's a good point.
in both cases, there's ways to hate your day. The point is, I think that you have to figure out what your North Star is and how do you, I mean, it's cliche and it's kind of trite, but how do you enjoy the journey on the way to your North Star? So it's multiple things because the person in the day job feels like they don't have a North Star. So yes, the easy answer is going to entrepreneurship. But then if you work 16-hour days
You
and
don't
don't
have the
have
balance.
relationships, you don't have balance, then you're also going to hate your day.
Yeah, I
So
think it's
it's,
interesting because
yeah,
I have kids in school, right? Third grade, sixth grade, and seventh grade.
yeah,
And I'm at this point where I'm realizing that I'm going to follow through with pulling my kids out of school, which I've been saying
mhm,
for years, but for a while, especially when you have three kids that are so close in age, it's definitely helpful to put them in school, right? Because you don't have three toddlers running around the house, and there's a system, and especially that you go through these tours of schools, and it can be extremely impressive what they're going to do. And now they add the mindfulness, and now they add the extra, sort of the ways that they wake these kids up. But by and
mhm,
large, I feel like school is made for people who want to stay within a box and eventually go get a job. And what I see is many, many, many adults who are unhappy in their jobs. And so
yes,
I pull back from that and say, zoom out. Do I want my daughter, who now has 6 hours of homework a night, because college has become so much more competitive, to stay in this pressure cooker so she can go to a quote unquote good college so she can go get a job? And then what's the end result? Like, is she going to be really fulfilled and happy? And I'm thinking about other things. Like,
yeah,
I just called this guy who's going to build garden beds and a greenhouse for us. And we can do homeschool in 90 minutes a day. And then after that, she's going to be learning investing. And we even talked about start her business, like now, like a family business. Like, we're thinking about, should we start a coffee shop, just for the fact that I'd rather open a coffee shop and let her do social media for it, literally, than spend what
yeah,
I was spending on private school in LA, which was 60 grand per kid a year. Right. So it's
yeah,
like, I'd rather, do that with the money. And so I'm curious about, for you've been an entrepreneur and you've been studying entrepreneurs for a long time. So I get the cautionary piece of it. I think that's
mhm,
really, really true. Like, you could become your own worst boss.
yeah,
But let's say you have some level of balance, and let's say you get to wake yourself up fully. You get to utilize your human capital fully, be creative,
yeah.
expand, don't work for somebody else's dreams, build your own dreams. Um, Help us understand, what are the what are the things that are available, and how can we, even those of us who've been dreaming about that but haven't yet made the leap, what do you think makes entrepreneurship successful when you begin? How do you start it? How do you, what sort of things do you have in mind so that you can know where you're headed, and start to remember who you really are as a creative,
Mm.
beautiful soul, which I think everybody is.
So there's a couple ideas. I would say that, I throw around the term North Star, and obviously that just means your purpose. But how do you find your purpose? Because that's sort of the first step. I would say that there's a couple different concepts, but Ikigai is a very good one, as you've heard of before. But it's this Venn diagram of what you're good at, what the world needs, what you can monetize. Like this is all these ideas, and when you find the intersection of those three circles. And there's other types of Venn diagrams that show overlapping parts of your life and how that can help you define what you should be working on. But that's a great first step. I think that's a very smart first step. Very simple. Uh, After that, then I think that the most important thing is to set expectations with yourself. So anything you build is going to take longer than you think it will take, but know that you can do it. Like the people that have accomplished it, the people that you look up to, they're not any more special or different than you. So they've just been grinding it out for an extended period of time. And if you commit, a ridiculous amount of time to that thing, so much so that it makes it almost impossible for you to fail. If you're a smart person, you learn from your mistakes, you iterate through all the, ups and downs and all the things that every single day when you're an entrepreneur, you feel like there's a fire somewhere or, there's shit hitting the fan. And that's just part of it. That's par for the course. But that's why I love, a concept of a 10-year rule, like commit 10 years to this thing, both financially, uh, mentally, if you want to include another component, spiritually, find a way to architect your life so that you can pursue this ikigai North Star for the next 10 years. And what does that really mean? It means that I mentioned mentally, you have to know that it's going to take you longer than you think it will, but also financially. So that maybe means not quitting your job right away because you only have so many months of rent or mortgage and you have responsibilities. So if you can set yourself up to do it for a long enough period of time, I think that's the first thing. Second, or actually that'd be the thing after Ikigai, the second thing. The third thing that you should take into consideration would be reverse engineering success. So look at somebody who's done it before you. You're going to define your end goal. You're going to look at somebody who's accomplished that end goal. You're going to deconstruct the key steps and you just follow that path. And if you combine those three ideas, so Ikigai, figuring your North Star, applying and pursuing it for more time than you think you will have to, as well as reverse engineering somebody who's done it before, that's an exceptional formula to make anybody, almost anybody, successful at anything. I think those are probably the three most powerful ideas in entrepreneurship that can apply across the board.
Tell us about your personal way that you applied that. Like, what was your entrepreneur journey? How did you make the leap? Tell us a little bit about your personal story of that entrepreneur path.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, the most recent entrepreneur path or the most recent business is a podcast. So when I started the podcast, I was still building a company. So I was still drawing a salary from the company before it was acquired. I didn't make the leap. I didn't jump into something that wasn't paying me right away. I was working 9 to 5 and doing this 5 to 9 and on the weekends. And I was learning what worked and what didn't. And I was booking guests and I was finding advertisers. And I spent about 2 years building the podcast before it even made a dollar. And I de-risked the podcast. I de-risked it. So I didn't quit and, throw in the towel and stop the thing I was doing and say I'm going all in on podcasting with no idea what I'm doing and no revenue coming in. That's a very straightforward thing. The icky guy that I had was, again, what am I good at? What can I monetize? What does the world need? And in my mind, I was very good at marketing. I was very good at having great conversations with people. I was also great at building relationships with people that could be guests on my show. I know how to monetize it. I understand the basics of monetization of a podcast, a CPM game, an ad game, more viewers, more listeners, advertisers want access to that. And I would hope that the world needs more access to great information, great entrepreneurs, great thought leaders that have figured it out before. Because I think that if you help somebody else on their journey, that's a useful thing to bring to the world. So that was my ikigai. I de-risked starting the podcast. And I also fully believed that I wanted to commit to it for as long as possible. It wasn't, I say this often, but the podcast was not something that I was ever going to quit. It's something that I can do till the day that I die. And that's the mindset that I adopted day one. And lastly, reverse engineering success. I mean, everything that I've done in my show, if you think about at a macro level, when I first started, I wanted to do long form interview talking about entrepreneurship and business. So I studied the Tim Ferrisses, the Tom Billius, the Lewis Howes, the Chris Williamsons, the Stephen Bartletts, all these different business podcasts. I studied them. I listened to them. I listen how they ask questions. I listen to when they go on podcasts and they talk about their strategy. I know Stephen Bartlett has a particular thumbnail strategy he uses that helps me figure out how I want to set up my thumbnails. For all the social posts, which help with the marketing of the podcast. I figured out who are the newsletter writers that write the best newsletters that grow the quickest. Okay, I want to emulate that newsletter. I want to emulate this person that writes great tweets because I'm going to obviously have tweets that go out for the show. I want to emulate this person that has the best short form video because I see them blowing up on TikTok. So I'm going to look at their strategy and I'm going to take my content and I'm going to, copy that hook that they use. And then I'm going to find this great video, short form video strategy from this one particular creator. So I reverse engineer success from great creators all the time because I see how they've done it. I listen to them on podcasts, I listen to speak about their strategy, and then I include it into sort of my library. That's how I did the podcast. Exactly what I just said every
So
entrepreneur should do.
inspiring.
And that's how I did my show. And that's how I would build any business the
It's so
exact same way.
It's so inspiring because as you say each of the verticals that you reverse engineered, like before when you kind of went through that list of like Ikigai, reverse
Yeah.
engineer, North Star, it's like, okay, well, that's a great, sort of
Hmm.
umbrella answer. But when you just spoke out how you literally applied that concept, I think it's Stephen Covey, right, who says begin with the end in mind and then reverse
Yes.
engineer. Yeah. But how many people actually do that? Right? It's like,
Not many.
no, and you can compress decades into days when you're like,
Yeah.
listen, I don't have to ask this question because this question's been asked. I'm going to go
Hmm.
look at somebody who asked this question and look at what their answer is, and then compare it to somebody else who asked that question. And I have an answer now. Like I have the beginning of a great answer, and now I can make it my own. I want to just
Yeah.
drill down on one of those things because at this point, anyone who knows marketing knows that a newsletter really is the most effective
Yeah.
piece of marketing because, of course, social media has an algorithm. And at least if you send someone an email, they will get your email. Um, you have a huge newsletter. You have hundreds of thousands of people subscribe to your newsletter, which is, in today's day, that's more interesting and impressive than having a certain amount of followers on Instagram because we all know what people do to inflate those numbers. But if somebody's on a newsletter and week after week they're enjoying the content, it's really like shows the health of that business. So tell us a little bit about what you did learn that people like in newsletters and
Hmm.
what you could tell us about why you enjoy it and why people want to open it and why that affects your business so much.
Yeah. So a couple ideas about newsletters. First of all, I think that it's very important for everyone to write. I think that for me at least, writing helps me clarify my thoughts. I notice when I don't write, my recall on even certain words or ideas isn't as good. But when I do write, it seems to help me just, what's the best way of saying this? I'm more clear in everything that I do. When I speak about a concept that I just wrote about versus just heard about on a podcast secondhand, it just solidifies in my mind. And it also helps me understand what I don't know. So if I'm trying to write about something, it's similar to if you're trying to teach something, you understand your own knowledge gaps quite quickly. So in terms of like my own cognitive ability, my own personal improvement, writing I think is very important. I think everyone should write. And I think that I have a big issue with outsourcing all of your writing and thinking to generative chat tools for that particular reason. But outside of that, for newsletters, how I grow it, first of all, how you grow anything is with good content. Uh, the audience that I tap into in particular, I find that newsletters that are explaining very advanced concepts, bringing in lived experience, and then whittling it down to the most simple form where you can convey this really complex idea, embedding your lived experience in a very simple way, not too wordy, is the best way to write. That is how people, because people can find information anywhere, but they want to find it in an easy to consume, entertaining way, but they also want you to inject yourself into it. Um, if I can find a way to say something simpler, then that's a useful sentence or two sentences to edit. You don't want to just put words in for word's sake. The more time I spend researching or prepping for a newsletter, it always seems to do a little bit better. So I think that if you put more energy and focus into it, like everything, um, I think that people can feel that and people can understand that when they read it. And in terms of marketing a newsletter, because obviously you have to have good writing first. If you just market something that's not good, then people are just going to discover the shit quicker. But if you if you market a newsletter, of course, a newsletter is a product. You can market it any way you'd market any product, but meaning that you can, of course, have it in your link in bio. You can have call to actions in your podcast, top of your show notes to go subscribe to your newsletter, which I have all those things. I post that newsletter in terms of distribution across my website, across my newsletter, across Medium, across Hacker Noon. I put it everywhere with CTAs all back to my main list. That's very technical marketing that you do for anything. If you have a product, like just distribute it everywhere and then sort of CTA people back to the main list that you want people to subscribe to. So on every social, obviously there's a CTA for people to subscribe to my newsletter because my goal is to get people off my social channels and to capture their email because any social channel, if you put a post out on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, doesn't matter. Only a small percentage of your audience is going to see it versus if you have a newsletter list and you send out a newsletter blast, 100% of them see it. So the goal for me is to capture emails, have a more intimate connection with my audience. I would say the one outside of all the different marketing things that you can do for a newsletter. I mean, you can run paid to it. You can, if you put it on your website and, then it ranks and then people discover it and then they CTA and go back to, and I host on Kit right now. I've hosted on Substack in the past, excuse me. But one strategy that's worked very well, excuse me, for the podcast and the newsletter is to find other communities, other newsletters that have similar audiences to me, and trade advertisements or trade sponsorships. So I'll find one of the deals that I'm working on right now is with The Hustle. So we do like it, which is a big business newsletter. So I'm going to run an ad for The Hustle in my newsletter, and they're going to run an ad for my newsletter in The Hustle. Now, why does this work so well? Because when you're marketing a newsletter, you don't want to have to convince the person that sees the ad for the newsletter or sees the placement for the newsletter that they should start reading newsletters. You want to tap into a community of people that already read newsletters and just convince them that yours is the one to read. So people can again put their newsletter everywhere. They can pay to place it on a podcast. They can push it out on social. They can put it in their story on Instagram. But you have to understand all these things work to a degree, but they'll never be as effective because somebody on Instagram may not be a newsletter reader. Somebody who listens to a podcast may not be a newsletter reader. So ultimately, all these things can work, but they're just going to be more expensive. So to drive that end result, or they're just going to, even if you own the assets, they're just going to not convert at the same rate as if you tap into other communities. And I would say the same for a podcast. If I want to grow my podcast, what are we doing now? I'm on your show, you're on my show. We're tapping into people that are podcast listeners already. I'm not asking you to write an editorial or an opinion piece or an op-ed in my newsletter saying go back to your podcast because I don't know if 100% of my newsletter readers are podcast listeners. Some are, but not 100% are. So, tap into other communities that already have the type of person who would be the perfect fit for your customer and just put your hand up and say, hey, I'm another option if you already like what you're reading over here.
Scott, I just want to tell you something. We've done almost 1,000 episodes and we've had so many great people on who mutual people and maybe some others, but really beautiful things have been shared. I want you to know when it comes to marketing and business, what you just shared was so valuable. Like
Thank you.
it gets a gold star. Like it was
Thank you.
so valuable and not complex, but very thorough. And it's seemingly obvious, and yet people don't connect those dots for people. And I'm so grateful to you because you have so much humility, you have so much passion. And also it's just like I see so many people with good content. I love what you said. They just, if you have bad content, they just see the shit faster. It's so funny. It's true. But I see so many people who do have good content, who are worthy of connecting with human beings, and they don't hear what you just said. They don't see that. And so instead, they're creating something and no one's seeing it. And it's very sad and it's very
It's
frustrating.
very sad. Very
And so
sad.
now let's take that same sort of reasoning and apply it to podcasting. When you started,
Mhm.
there were already other podcasts, obviously. You know, you and I didn't start
Many.
day one. Yeah, I started 2017. And you started what year?
End of 2018,
Yeah,
2019.
right. So around the
So 2 years
similar.
after you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you did that and I love that. First of all, I love that you're like, I'm just doing this, period. I'm doing this until the day I die, because that is the sign of someone who's all in, and the universe rearranges itself when you are all in, first of all. But in addition to that, you said, I didn't make a buck for at least 2 years. Like I was just like putting all the seeds in place. So how would you suggest to somebody who's starting a podcast, who wants
Mhm.
to get listeners, what are some of the things that you did that start, besides what you said, which is really, really true, going on other people's podcasts, right? Because that's correct. You're then helping other podcast listeners find new podcasts rather than trying to convince a TikTok watcher to go be a podcast listener. They don't even consume content that way. So that's very smart.
Exactly.
But other than that, which is huge, what are some of the things that you would suggest people to do to start getting their first 1,000, 10,000 listeners?
I would say that it's important, especially at the beginning, to niche down. When I first started my show, I was only having conversations with chief revenue officers and chief marketing officers for early stage startups. That was my passion. That's what I was actually
Interesting.
living every single day.
Okay.
And I found that that built uh, a very loyal initial following. And I think that too many people, I, like in everything, you got to define your North Star. And at that point, the podcast was really, yeah, I had future plans for it, but I also wanted to learn like tactical stuff for the job that I was doing every single day. I think that a lot of people, when they start their podcast, are like, I just want to interview the biggest guests, and I don't even know how this, plays into my business. And I want to have these great conversations, and I want to be Joe Rogan. And there's a time and a place for that. And my
Right.
show evolved from my show was actually originally called Sales versus Marketing, super tactical. And as I evolved as a human and I wanted to learn more things and I felt that there was more value in other topics, that's when it changed into mindset, business, entrepreneurship, spirituality, relationship, mental model, all these different things that I love to speak about right now. Because those things have had more of an impact on my life than just figuring out how to run the best Facebook ad set. So I think that starting off niche I think is a good idea. Define who your listener is, and it can be you at an earlier stage in your life, or it can be your customer, and focus on creating content for that because I think that that will help you. Uh, that'll help you attract your first 1,000 true fans much quicker. And if you look at, by the way, all the big influencers, doesn't matter if it's a Gary V or even like, a, like I use Grant Cardone as an example. I know that people have different views of Grant Cardone, but I use him as an example because he started off with sales content, only sales content. He did not talk about real estate. All of his stuff was sales. Gary Vee was talking about wine, and he built
Bingo.
his content around wine. And then now, what do they talk about? Everything and anything. But I think starting off niche down is more important than just, excuse my language, throwing shit at the wall and hoping something sticks.
Yeah, no, first of all, that's really good advice. When I started, my podcast was called Don't Keep Your Day Job. And
I
it
like that.
was really about creatives getting paid to
Yeah.
do creative things. So
Hmm.
the artwork had like a chef's rolling pin, a paintbrush, a
Hmm.
typewriter, ballet slippers. It was really very specifically meant for creatives getting
Yeah.
to do their passion projects. And that was a smart move to build an audience. Um, Although it wasn't a strategy at the time, it was really where I was at. I was a songwriter who had made
Yeah.
money in songwriting and didn't have to have a day job. And I felt like I beat the system and I wanted to teach other creatives how to do that. But I love what you're saying because, again, when you reverse engineer what people have done,
Hmm.
I love going back. If you guys are listening and you're intrigued by this, go to later after this podcast, go to YouTube, and when you go to Gary V, sort by the date and you'll see his first video and it's
Yeah.
hilarious. It's like he's wearing a sweater vest And he's like, "Hi, this is Gary Vaynerchuk, and I'm selling wine. Let's taste it." And it's the most low, like whatever high def, it's low def. It's just like him with a folding table. And he started out helping his father, his family's wine business. So I think that that's really brilliant. You did touch on the fact that marketing is something that you are really passionate about. And I don't think people know enough about running ads or about Facebook. And I don't think it's interesting enough that that should have been your entire content. But I do think it's sort of like I'll meet amazing women, let's just say, and they have zero financial literacy when it comes to the stock market. And I'm like, nah, that's not cool because you're smarter than that and
Yeah.
you're a powerhouse and you're brilliant. And you just told me that you started a business. You should know a little bit about diversifying that money and letting that money work for you. But they maybe just feel overwhelmed. Similarly with Facebook ads or ads in general online, people
Hmm.
are like, I don't know, I get overwhelmed, so I don't even dip my toe in. It's like, but you have to, right? Like
You have
to
to.
to
Yeah.
to a tiny extent, it's part of like just like when you move into a new home and you don't want to have to set up all the logistics, but you have to call the cable company, you have to call water and power, like you just have to do it. If you don't have any sense of how to market online, um, you're at a disadvantage, right? So when it comes to marketing and let's say using Facebook ads or Meta
Mhm.
in general, Instagram ads, um, what have you found the most profitable in terms of what is it marketing your podcast? Is it marketing your newsletter? And what do you think are some things people should have in mind in terms of like what kind of freebie do you think works? Or do you think you should do a paid, like something that's paid, that market something that's paid? And
Yeah.
to which vertical have you had the most success?
So when I think about marketing my newsletter or my podcast, I've only spent money on platforms where that audience is already existing. So of course you can do these like swaps where you do an interview swap or like a feed drop that also happens. Or you can run programmatic ads or insertions on other people's shows or a newsletter. You do like a banner ad swap. You'd want to run again because there's a defined community out there for podcasts, for example, like Player FM gives you options to run paid in their app. Castbox gives you options to run paid advertisements in their app. So if there's a defined community that is the exact avatar, I think go there. If you're selling a t-shirt, obviously you're going to start figuring out Facebook ads and Google ads. So what are some smart marketing ideas? Um, I think that the first thing is if you're going to sell a cheaper product or what's referred to as a lower ticket product, um, if you're going to be running ads, you want to figure out a way to increase the lifetime value of the customer you attract. So in 2025, what's happened with Facebook and Google is if you have a product, say under $100, it's very hard to run an ad and consistently be profitable if all you make off that person is $100. There in the past, it's been easier, but now there's more privacy, so ads aren't as efficient as they used to be. So I think that what that means is not just focus on getting that initial sale, but also focus on how do we upsell or how do we cross sell or how do we create a subscription product, things that make the ad spend more justified. And in technical terms, it's called ROAS, return on ad spend. If you have a higher ticket item, like a very high ticket item, and there's going to be a longer sales process as opposed to somebody seeing an ad and purchasing, then some sort of some sort of free offer so that you can continuously market to them so that they will eventually turn into a customer. So if you're selling something that's $10,000, $20,000, they usually are not going to buy the first time they experience it or they see an ad. Actually, if you look at more traditional, I'm trying to keep the jargon out of it, but in enterprise sales, where you're selling $100,000 to $5 million things, software implementations, hardware, whatever, 7 to 15 different touch points. That is what it takes before somebody buys from you. And if you think about what 7 to 15 different touch points are, that means It could be a call. It could be them going onto your website. It could be them reading a white paper. It could be them reading a PDF. It could be them listening to a podcast from your CEO. It could be a second call. It could be a text. It could be a DM on LinkedIn. The point is, assume that that person has to consume 7 to 15, consume your company in some way or interact with your company 7 to 15 different times. So if it is a higher ticket product where they don't convert the first time they see the ad, then the ad should be, how do I find a way to communicate with them more to build trust so that eventually they do turn into a customer? And that's what you have to do. You have to bridge that trust gap. If it's a lower ticket, cheaper product, that just means that, okay, they're going to convert the first time, but I might not be profitable the first time they buy something from me. So, how do I find a way to build a value ladder and to add more things and to sell them more things over a longer period of time? Those are the two things you have to think about when you're running ads or marketing anything.
What is your business model in terms of you have this podcast? I'm sure
Hmm.
people listen and then they want time with you, they want your coaching, they want your knowledge. So what do you guys do in your business?
Yeah, that's a great, right now, it's very easy to teach this stuff and to preach it, but sometimes it's harder to implement it. What I mean by that is I haven't, over the past 6 years, I've focused entirely on giving value, on growing the audience, on giving is everything and anything away for free. And I haven't productized it to the degree that I probably should have. I think that I've erred on the side of caution of productizing it and selling my time or selling consulting or selling a product because there's so much garbage out there. So that being said, it hasn't, I haven't made as much money, but I'm not hurting financially because I also do believe that when you build the audience and you build trust, money does find you, and then also opportunities find you. So I'm thinking, by the way, like I have not, I have not sold a course or I have not sold my time. I don't want to do that. If I'm going to do something, I think that actually the future of the creator economy is to take small equity positions in startups and then use and be an advisor, mentor for the startups and use the asset you built as marketing. I find that trading
Smart.
time for hours or even selling a course, unless it's incredible, there are some great ones out there, but you have to put a lot of energy into building it. But the time for dollars for me is not interesting.
No.
But leveraging the influence and the audience that I've built for equity in a company that has virtually unlimited upside, that to me is more interesting. Courses, communities are also on the table, but again, I'm just trying to make sure that I don't spread myself too thin.
So your main business around your podcast is ads and
It
sponsors,
is.
affiliate revenue.
Yeah. That's all. That's where it is. And the reason why is because if I start doing all the other things that aren't unlimited upside, like taking equity positions, you'll be so busy with the other things that you won't find time to do the things or spend the time on the things that can have the highest payoff. And that's I'm very conscious of that as well.
What would you advise podcasters? Because we all know that like a CPM,
Hmm.
that's what the jargon is for those of you
Yes.
listening. When you're selling an ad to a sponsor, it's like anywhere from $25 to like 50
Yeah.
bucks usually per thousand downloads, right? In a short period of time, not cumulatively. So it's
Yeah.
not really a tremendous amount, although there might be cool things that you can share with us that podcasters could be thinking of that could be more lucrative.
Oh, yeah. So I think that most people who start a podcast should do it when they have a business already in place. So I think that um, what you should, for most people, what you should do, and this is what I'm working on now. So I am working on a paid community. I think that that's very valuable. So I would say in terms of like things you can sell, if we go through the list, obviously equity positions would be great if anybody can take them, but you have to build a significant audience, and not everybody can just jump into that role and take an equity position in a startup if they don't have a huge audience that can help grow that startup where the startup's product is aligned with the audience that you have built. Other options would be coaching, consulting. Meh, it's like time for money. There's like a limit on that. Um, you could have a course that's scalable. I don't think that's a bad idea. Um, but I think that where people should start is focus on community. So focus on a lower ticket community. It can be, I don't care, it could be a WhatsApp group, it could be Facebook, it could be Discord, it could be school, it could be pick one and charge a nominal amount and create community because that's now recurring revenue. And then from that community, that actually acts as a first of all recurring revenue stream for you and people are going to be asking questions, interacting with each other. The product actually, ironically, in a community is not meant to be you. It's meant to be the collective wisdom of all the people that are behind the paywall. Those are the people who should be supporting, helping each other grow, their peers in that community. And also you can jump in and you can, provide guidance, support. But the community is this sort of uh, peer group of individuals hold each other accountable, are obviously doing the thing that you probably have done at an earlier stage, and that's why they want to join your community. You're going to give them a little bit of advice, but from that community, then you can upsell them into a much higher ticket course, which can be great. But I think that that's the funnel that most people should follow. Uh, and this is assuming that you don't have a product or service that you sell. This is assuming that you're starting a podcast and you don't have an actual company. If you have an actual company, I can tell you what the playbook is for that. But this is assuming it's just you and you have knowledge and wisdom. You want to monetize that. I would do community first. That's recurring revenue. I would do course added on top of that. Why do you do it that way? Because if you just try and sell a course, if they have no exposure to you and they've never gotten value from you yet outside of the free value, I think it's very hard to justify a high course price. And I think that if you have community first and they get immense value from that, that is one of those touch points on the journey in the funnel to 1,000, 5,000, $10,000 course. But you have to give them an exceptional amount of value before they'll pull the trigger on that. The days of just running Facebook ads, people not knowing who you are and buying a $10,000 course are over. So I would architect that funnel. If you have a product or a service, um, the way that I would use a podcast is I would find people who could be my customer or decision makers for companies that could be my customer. Say I sell like cybersecurity audits or something like that. I would find CTOs. I would invite them on the podcast. I would interview them. I'd build rapport with them. I'd make sure all the questions I ask them are questions that a CTO would ask. And I can find that through a variety of ways through I mean, if you really want to get specific, there's Answer the Public or Ask Socrates that can actually find the highest search volume queries for a specific keyword. That can inform the questions that I can ask that CTO. So when I ask that CTO and I have a 45-hour long sit down with him or her, not only am I building rapport with them, they could be my customer in the future because they are the avatar that I'm selling these cybersecurity solutions to. But also, all the content that I create out of that podcast is marketing, newsletter, tweets that I know is going to be answering questions that my customer avatar has. So if I actually have a product or service, that's how I would structure my podcast. So two different styles, both of them work. They can overlap as well if you want. No need to not have a community if you had a cybersecurity company. I think it's actually a smart play or a course attached to it. But those would be the ways that I'd recommend.
It's so helpful. And, we used to have many, many more business conversations on this podcast. And then as you also evolved, your
Yeah.
podcast, ours evolved and really turned into how do you get into flow state and stay in your conscious,
Yeah.
mind and what is the spirituality technology that you can tap into and wholeness and all of that.
Very
But
important
it's
too, by the way.
really, yes, but it's really cool to have someone so delightful like you are and so wise, just
I
laying
appreciate you.
down. I mean, you've just saved so many people the time and the confusion and confusion like hurts your brain. Like it's like
Hmm.
stressful just to have answers that are or sorry, questions that not only are not answered, but you think are unanswerable. And
Yeah.
your answers just now are just I agree with everything you just said. Like from everybody that I've asked and polled, you just gave like the bullet points of what really we need to know, which is just so helpful because so many people who do listen to the show, as spiritually inclined as we are, we like geeking out on how to take our gifts and make money. And these are just really smart approaches to things. It makes so much sense. One of the things that you just talked about is really building intimacy with people in order to eventually feel like you can warrant a sale. Like instead of
Hmm.
just going from cold traffic to, hey, buy my thing, it's like, let's create a connection. Like, let's work
Yeah.
together. And I want to deposit value into you. And in your show, having, the show that you have, having spoken to Guy Kawasaki and Seth Godin,
Hmm.
and even in the first thing you answered, clearly you have a much more holistic approach to business. And that is why you can see the long haul. It's not just a sprint, you're really building relationships. And that is so key. I want to just draw that out and highlight that that's been the through line in everything that you're saying, from newsletter to your first answer to, it's really like, how do you function as like the best version of yourself and build relationships with people that are really valuable first. And as far as that's concerned, you need to be present. And so now, to take it to a more sort of internal conversation, what do you advise in terms of a morning practice, spiritual practice? What books do you read? How do you remind yourself to show up as Scott every day
Mm.
versus the part of our brain that thinks we have to impress, thinks we're not enough, and then can't do the thing which you talked about, which is building quality relationships, because we're coming from insecurity, or we're coming from a place of hustle versus presence and intentionality. What do you do to get yourself to just feel whole and present so that you can have the most successful, enjoyable day?
Yeah. First of all, I think that it's important to say that no matter what strategy people will, discuss about how they find themselves in a better mindset when they approach business, there's going to be days when things are just chaotic and you just, all the best ideas in the world are not going to help you through that. And I think that that's very important to understand that if you're having a bad day, it's okay to have bad days. I mean, I think that too much of the sort of the hustle culture or entrepreneur mantra is every day I got to be perfect. I got to wake up. I got to do the cold plunge. I got to do the red light therapy. I got to go to the gym.
Oh my God.
So, and it makes you feel like you're less than,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't be successful if I don't do that. And I think that that's very toxic. I think that you're allowed to have bad days. You're allowed to have days that are off with yourself, with your business, with your spouse, with your friends. It just happens. And give yourself grace to understand that that's part of life. Now, that being said, for me, I think that trying to think, this is a very good question. The first thing that is very important to me is some sort of movement. Again, this is going to be something that's probably a common thread with everyone, some sort of movement, walking, going for a jog, going to the gym. That helps me get my day started. I think that it's very important just to wake up. And I think that there's also a lot of uh, hormone and neurochemical response is positive. And I would even say that not just starting your day, but for me, uh, you know, if I have a bad email, if I get a bad email or I get into an argument with somebody before I respond, this is like a rule that I have. Before I ever respond, I'll go exercise. That helps me, you know,
Smart.
take a step back, clear my head. There's positive hormone response to when you exercise. It helps you think of solutions, and then also you don't fire back in like this angry way. And that has been a huge, huge, huge hack to most of my most stressful situations. Um, I truly do believe if more people moved more, there'd be less depression in this world. And I
A
think that
hundred
that's
percent.
a mandatory. And I think that it's horrible that, doctors prescribe all these SSRIs without even asking, how many times do you go to the gym every single week? Anyways, so
100%. I just was
yeah.
talking to Dave Asprey, who was just on the show,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, he wrote a book called Heavily Meditated, which you probably know. And
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about all these like beautiful spiritual beliefs. And then he said, and before we even get there, and obviously he believes very much in it, he just wrote a whole book on meditation. He's like, but before you get there, if your body is in danger because it hasn't slept, or you have tons of cortisol, or you eat tons of sugar, or you never work out, you're not going to be a good meditator because your body is telling you you're in danger. And if you don't take care of your body at all, then
Yeah.
good luck like reading a mindset
Yeah.
book, because you have a body that's literally in fight or flight because
Yeah.
it's malnourished. And so it is really interesting, and it should be like punishable that a
I
doctor is
agree.
like, "Oh, the first thing we're going to do is give you a prescription before we've really looked at, do you sleep? ever through the night?
Yeah.
Do you drink any water? Do you ever leave the house? Do you ever walk? Do you ever see vitamin D hit your skin? Like
Yeah.
it's insane. It's insane.
It's so bad. And now it's happening with psilocybin and ketamine. Like they're still not focusing on the root stuff. Like you're like, oh, well, you have anxiety, you have depression, so maybe SSRIs aren't good. Let's get you on ketamine. Like I just don't understand why they're so adverse to just understanding that there's a lot of other factors that contribute to depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
so
mean,
that's important to me.
yeah, I mean, listeners of my shows, I'm sure some love it, some hate it, some are in the middle, but it happens to just be that I'm good friends with Cheryl Hines. And as a result, I became good friends with Bobby Kennedy. And I learned
Hmm.
so much just about chronic illness and so much about how sick we are. Like we're so
Hmm.
sick,
Yeah.
we're feeding ourselves such garbage with corn syrup and seed oils. It's like, before you even begin to ask other questions, like, how about
Yeah.
stop being sick first? And then we'll deal with what's next. But it's like, it's like having a closet that's so unorganized and everything's busting out of it. And you're like, all right, instead of dealing with that, I'm just going to like turn the lights off so I don't see it. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I
Clean out the
know.
closet first, please. Yeah.
I know, 100%. I would say that the other idea that's helped me a lot, this is a Jeff Bezos idea that he's applied to business, but I applied to my life. So the idea is regret minimization framework. And ultimately, what that means is, fast forward to 80, 90 years old, are you going to look back on your life and regret not doing that thing? It's a very powerful idea for starting a business, but I apply it to other areas of my life. So at 80 or 90 years old, am I going to regret not having kids or not having a spouse that loves me or not taking care of my health? And the answer is 100% yes. So I allocate time for those things because in the moment, it's very easy to forget how important they are. It's very easy to say, hey, listen, I don't know how we're going to have time for kids, or, I could do X amount more work as opposed to going on a date night, or all these, or I don't have to go to the gym. Like I'm okay. Like I don't feel like, lethargic, and I'm not really that fat, and I'm in good health right now. But regret minimization framework, and understand that when you apply that to your current situation, you realize how important these other things are. And just that quick sort of readjustment with reality and reprioritization of things that will actually matter to you when you're older. I think that that is uh, a great idea that helps you realize that all these other things in your life are very important, which has helped me with my relationships, with my fitness, my physical health, my spirituality, all of this. Because I think that I'm also fortunate because I see people that do not do this exercise and just focus on, like, say, financial success. And then I see their lives after,
Oh
significant
my God.
financial windfalls and, nine-figure exits. And I'm like, I don't really want that life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's,
And I have the front row seat to it.
yeah.
So those ideas help me sort of make sure that every single day, you mentioned before, like you don't want to just live for milestones. Well, actually, I mentioned this, but you brought it up before. You don't want to live for milestones. You want to make every day the perfect
Yeah.
day. Those ideas help me carve out time purposefully in my day for the things that matter. And ironically, when I do carve stuff out for those things, my work gets better because now I have only so much time for work. And because I've done all the other stuff, I've, spent some time with Gina, and we had a great dinner, or we just, shooting the shit together, and like we were just laughing. And now there's like happiness and joy. And I went to the gym and I feel energized. And all of a sudden, all my work is better because I didn't just sit in front of a computer for 16 hours and grind away way past when I was actually efficient. Um, so
It's
you notice that
so,
you actually get more done.
I love it. It's so brilliant. And you and I had that conversation on
Mhm.
your podcast, and I'll link to that also because people should be listening to your podcast. And I was on it, and
Likewise. Yeah.
we had that conversation about what really is success and fulfillment. And, there really isn't a person who's ever said, I reached the end of my life and my bank account is what fills me up. It's
Yeah.
whose life have you made better and who has made your life better? And what are the
Yeah.
moments that you've captured? And I think it's a balance. I was sharing with you, I spent half my life, I grew up in Florida, in South Florida, near you. And then I spent the other half of my life in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And growing up, I felt like a lot of people were living regular lives and I wanted to quote unquote be somebody and go do something. And so I moved here and there's a lot of excitement and dopamine and there is something really fun about waking up every day with this feeling of a dream and putting something in the world. And also, I am surrounded by a lot of people who put their ladder on that wall and only on
Mm.
that wall. And they, as Jim Carrey says, I wish everyone could be super rich and super famous to realize that there is nothing in that. And and
I'll
so,
t Well, I
what?
was gonna say one thing that I've noticed. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not it's very easy to just say this, and then people are like, well, you know what? You don't like money, you don't like. I've noticed personally, and maybe this is just my personality. I have never felt as fulfilled buying shit for myself as I felt when I buy
I know.
stuff for someone
I
else.
know. It's so nice. It's so true.
I think that's most people. I think that it's easy if you're not
They
paying
did that
attention.
study. That's a
Yeah,
study. They did that at Harvard. They did it both ways, and people were
yeah,
happier. And biologically, they had a biological upgrade when they checked them on a physiological level from having bought for other people versus
yeah.
themselves.
So who are you
Yeah.
doing this for? What
Yeah.
like
It's
I don't care about anything for myself. Like you guys like I don't spend money on myself at all. I spend money on myself for business, but that's fun for me. This is a hobby, right? But true fulfillment is doing things for other people, is surprising other people, is taking care of other people when they need it. That to me is the best feeling in the world.
Yeah. I think everything is about, the balance. And unfortunately, I have so many women that listen to my show who are such givers that they're like completely depleted and they
Mm,
find fulfillment in it, but they're also sort of, raised to deny themselves any kind of fulfillment. And I think there needs to be balance there. We need to learn to like put the oxygen mask on and take a bath and all of that. But
yeah,
I
yeah.
do think that the way that the culture in general um, is dictating to us fulfillment, it's all about what else could you achieve and what more stuff could you have, and that is not it. It's just not it. So
Hmm.
um you're really such a wonderful, cool person. And I'm so
I
happy that you
appreciate you.
came on and
Thank
you're
you.
sweet and you're smart and you're grounded. And it's really great that you're putting yourself in the world because people just walk away with so much, some tangible knowledge they can apply, but also some like really beautiful world perspective. So thank you, and tell everybody where they can. Not only will send links, but where do you want to send them to? How can they get on your newsletter? How can they follow your podcast?
Sure. So obviously the podcast is called Success Story. You can find it wherever you get podcasts. If you want one website that has all the links, it'd be successstorypodcast.com. Newsletter would also be newsletter.scottdclary.com. And then the social is also at Scott D. Clary. And I'm sure that if you go to one of those, you'll find all the other ones. So
Great, then we will. Scott, thank you so much for today. I really enjoyed it all of it.
thank you so much. This is beautiful. It's a lot of fun. I love, again, I love your questions. I love the conversations you have. So thank you.
Great.